What you see on the screen right now is a basic registration form. Such registration forms are in many applications and web applications, and many of them require usernames, email addresses, and passwords to be provided. And once those email addresses and passwords are provided, they insert those values into a database, and this is what this video is about. Once data is inserted, it reaches tables within a database. Once one row is inserted into a table, it increases its row count. You can see here that this specific table has 6,000 rows, and that means that 6,000 rows have been inserted into this table and are ready to work with. So in other words, our table has 6,000 rows, and to make that 6,001 we have to insert a row into a table, and that can be done by using an insert query. So that looks like this: insert into table name, wrapped in backticks to avoid errors related to reserved keywords, values, and then like this. What this does is it tells our database that we want to insert into the cars table. What we insert into the table is defined in the values clause, like this. That's not enough generally, because we also have to define what columns we need to insert data in. This query can be done, can be executed, but to execute such a query, we need to define every value that we want to insert. So in other words, if we use a query like this, without specifying the columns we want to insert data in, we may have to insert something like this. We may have to insert an ID column, then the car make. I'm deriving this from here, from the ID, make, car model, year, and the VIN. For the ID, we use a null, and I will explain why in a second. For the car make, let's say we have a BMW. For the car model, let's say we have 6 series. For the year, let's say we have 2010. And for the VIN code, let's say we have a random VIN code. What this does is it inserts one value into the cars table, accounting for the structure of the columns. So you can see that our table has an ID column, and that column is defined by a key. That means that this column has a primary key on it, and all values in it increment automatically. So what we need to do to insert a value into it is we specify nothing or null. That way our value will be incremented automatically, and we don't need to specify a specific value because database will deal with that itself. Then we have the car make, which is the BMW, the car model, which is 6 series, the year, which in our case is 2010, and the VIN code, which is an A random value that we just specified. So if we execute this query, we will now see that we have inserted one row into a table. And if we refresh the table, select all, mix is able to select everything, you can see that we now have 6,001 rows in a table. And here you can see that we have a row 6001 with an ID of 6116. This is automatically generated of car make BMW, of car model 6 series in the year 2010 with a VIN code we specified. And that's the crux of it. So we have just inserted a row into our table by running a query like this. This is often done when we have a lot of values to insert or a lot of data to work with, and that's because we don't specify the columns that we want to insert data in. In other words, we also can run an insert query like this. Insert into cars, then specify specific columns, for example, car make and car model, and then only insert values into those columns. So we'll have only 2 values to insert. So let's say we want to insert a car make of Mazda and a car model of CX-9. If we execute this query, we will now see that the query has successfully executed, and if we select everything from the cars table once again, we can now see that some data has been generated automatically. Here, the ID column has been generated automatically, 6118. The car make is Mazda, our model is CX-9, and the year and the VIN columns are left empty. That happens because we have a specific structure of our table. We made the table able to have empty values in columns. If those empty values are not permitted, we would have gotten an error. We can see that this can be explained looking at the table structure. We see that we have 5 columns. We have the ID column, we have the car make column, we have the car model, year, and VIN, right? What we specified was only the car make and car model, but the database inserted an ID, then left the year and the VIN empty. That happened because the ID column was an auto-incrementing column and a primary key. You can see here, primary key, auto-increment as an extra. This makes a null value or no value inserted into the column increment automatically. So this is why this is 6118. 2 values that we specify have been inserted into the table, and the year and the VIN are left empty. Once again, because the year is specified as only not null and doesn't have a default value. The same with the VIN. So in other words, if those 2 columns aren't null values, we can insert anything into them, and they won't have a default value if we insert nothing into them. So if we insert null values into any of those columns, except for the ID column because it increments automatically, we will receive an error. And this is why it's so vital to have your table structure in mind when inserting data into a table. So let's try the same query again. We can see that we have insert into cars, car make, car model, and as part of values, we will now insert nulls, just null. So we now have to say to our database, insert into cars, into those 2 columns right here, 2 values that are null and null. And since our structure does not permit those values, you can see here that we have null, no, null, no. That means that we may receive an error once we execute this query. So let's see what happens. You can see that our database has said that the insert statement, insert command, has failed because the column car make cannot be null. And this is not concerning the car model column because the car make has already errored out. So even if we insert a valid value into the car make column, let's say BMW, and one of our columns is still null, once again we don't permit null values into the car model, we will still receive an error. Now we see that car model cannot be null. So the lesson here is, if you insert data into your tables, make sure that they adhere to the data types and the options that you specify when creating your tables. To recap, we insert data into our tables by using the insert into statement. The insert into statement has to adhere to our table structure, to the fields, columns we have, types, and the options they have, whether they're null, whether they have primary keys inside of them, and what privileges they have. If you don't have insert privileges, you won't be able to insert data. We can write SQL insert queries like this: insert into, then specify a table we want to insert into. I enclose this in backticks to avoid reserved keyword errors. Then specify columns we want to insert into. So for example, the year. Then we specify the values that we want to insert. And then we end the query. This is one way to insert data. Another way to insert data into MySQL and into relational database management systems is insert into cars, same structure, then we specify the values, and in the values we specify everything, because now we tell our database that we want to insert into every column. So this would be null. The first value would be null because we have a primary key that increments the values automatically inside of that column. The car make would be, let's say, Mazda. The car model would be CX-9, and the year and the VIN can be left empty because we have structure enabling us to insert them given they're not null, but we may want to insert something regardless. So we say 2009 and the VIN code here. So one way to insert data is like this, by specifying columns we want to insert into, and the second way is by inserting values into every column that our database table has. If we do that, we don't need to specify columns. This is done in insert statements that insert a lot of data, or you can see this done in backups. When MySQL is restoring data, it will restore data, inserting data like this. Regardless, both of these statements are valid. Just make sure that your insert into statements have the necessary privileges. Make sure that the user you are running the queries with has the privilege of insert, and follow the structure of your table, and you will be good to go. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel for more tutorials, and until next time.